Welcome to this Lunch and Learn Get Unstuck. We're in day 4 of DC Startup Week. We're coming from you live at WeWork here in downtown DC. My name is Rachel Koretsky. I am one of the organizers of DC Startup Week and a founder of a tech startup, UPace, as my full-time job. We're so excited to be able to be here today. One of the things that we're most proud of at DC Startup Week that we focus on making entrepreneurship accessible and attainable for all. One of the core tenets of that is having this week be completely free for all of attendees. And we couldn't do that without our amazing sponsors be able to come in. And one of those for the second year in a row is AARP Innovation Labs. I see Jessica, she's one of our main points of contact there. And I want to say a special thank you for AARP for always being involved, as well as ensuring that the DMV startup community can continue to thrive, especially during these times of the pandemic and what's going on in the current ecosystem. So we appreciate even more all the support that you give us. With that said, I want to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today. We have Quo. He's currently a design thinker at AARP Innovation Labs. I'm so excited to have this conversation around Lunch and Learn and Get Unstuck. He works with startups, providing consulting services to help them shape their product to the AARP's market. So with that, please join me in welcoming Quo to the DC Startup Week stage.
Hello, sorry for that little lag. I was trying to make sure that my chat was up. But thank you, Rachel, for that wonderful introduction. And hello, everyone again. Just to iterate my introduction, I'm Quo Hernandez, and I'm part of the design thinking team at AARP Innovation Labs. Now on my screen, I know there's 3 people on there, but they're unable to join us today. But you'll hear a little bit more about my coworkers, Amy and DJ, in this workshop at a later point in our workshop. So my formal title is an innovation design thinker. And what that means in the most simplest and basic of terms is that I help people work through their work problems. And on a personal note, just to give you guys a little bit more about who I am from an out of work perspective, I have a background in graphic design and also user experience design. I have 3 adult dogs and 1 new puppy. And I have a strong passion for the arts, and I grew up in New Jersey. And I am definitely excited to be here and leading and walking you all through this workshop on getting unstuck. So before we go any further and before we start, I want to go through a list of agreements which are important to keep in mind for this workshop. And after I go through each agreement, can I get a thumbs up for confirmation, either in the little system that Zoom has, or if you're on camera, just show your thumbs up in agreement, right? Okay, so for us to push through and get unstuck, we have to be positive minded. And I know the feeling of getting stuck, and getting stuck is a very frustrating feeling. So it is important to not succumb to any type of negative emotions or feelings that it can bring. So thumbs up with that. All right. The next is being open-minded, which is our next agreement. And we'll be going through a lot of information and exercises that stretches our thinking. And it might seem a little bit strange, weird, out of the box, or new to some of you, but it is meant to be there to help you. Thumbs up for that. Okay. And last but not least is to be present. So please silence any distractions and participate in the questions, prompts, and activities that I will be providing. I know virtually we are losing the whole group and collaborative aspect of this workshop, but please participate and push yourself. We are definitely trying our best to keep you engaged. Okay, so now that we have set the foundation for this workshop, I want to do a quick exercise. So if you think back to my introduction about who I am and what I did, with that information that I have provided about myself, what kind of car do you think I drive? And you can post your answer in chat. And again, my prompt is, with the information that I have provided about myself, what kind of car do you think I drive? So I'm seeing a Jeep, SUV, okay, a Honda, Fiat, all right. I take public transportation, no car, Miata. Okay, some really interesting guesses there. Oh, a Tesla. If someone can give me a Tesla, I would definitely love that. And I cannot answer that question of what car do I drive. I will keep that as a secret. Jetpack. I love that. One day I will probably have a jetpack. Okay. So thank you for your guesses. That was really entertaining and that was a lot of fun to read. So the purpose of that exercise was to demonstrate what we call rivers of thinking. And now rivers of thinking is a phrase that Dr. Edward de Bono coined to describe the neural pathways that form from every experience that we encounter ever since we were children. So whenever we face a challenge, we channel all available information from that river in order to make a quick decision. So you can imagine this analogy, like you are being on top of a mountain. And with every rainstorm, new streams are developed, and the more rainstorms that occur, the deeper and stronger that stream becomes until it becomes a river. So with that being said, our brains are naturally hardwired to not find original solutions, but to apply past successful ones to new problems. And we like staying on course. We like staying within our rivers. It's definitely comfortable and very peaceful at times, but for us to be innovators, we have to break through these rivers. So going back to the exercise that we just completed, in order for you to guess what kind of car I drove, you went into your river of people who act or look like Koi or have any somewhat similarities to people that you might have come in contact with in the past in order to make that educated guess. However, oftentimes when people are stuck, they are stuck within a specific river. So now the question is, how do we break out of our rivers of thinking? And in order for us to be creative and to think expansively, which is thinking beyond your immediate personal context and get yourself stuck or get yourself out of your stuckness and your creative rut, you have to break out of your rivers of thinking. So how we do that is to think laterally. And lateral thinking is a term that Dr. Edward de Bono coined to describe the process of us thinking more deliberate, systematic, and thinking about other ways to arrive at a specific solution or a challenge. So going back to the mountain and the rivers analogy that I provided, you can imagine lateral thinking as the tiny streams that branch out from that main river. And they are all still different and they're all taking a different path, but they are still parallel and in line with that main river, and they all feed into the ocean or the lake and whatever body of water that rivers usually do feed into. So how do we practice lateral thinking and how do we break ourselves from our rivers? Well, here at AARP Innovation Labs, we practice a set of innovation behaviors, and one of the behaviors that we frequently embody in practice is called freshness. Now, freshness is the behavior of constantly seeking new internal and external stimuli to disrupt our thinking and to help inspire us to find new ideas, and also to see things from a different frame of mind. And also, for some background and a little bit of context, we represent freshness with the image of a dolphin because dolphins are known to break free from their pods in order to seek new and fresh feeding grounds. And once they do find that new and fresh feeding grounds, they come back and they relay that information to their family and friends. So what does freshness look like? Going back to what I mentioned about, you'll be hearing more about my coworkers, DJ and Amy. Well, my coworker, DJ, she loves reading her subscription to Oprah magazine, but she also has a subscription to Fine Woodworking magazine to help her see the world through the eyes of her husband's profession and interest, and also to find different creative inspiration there. And now a little bit of information from my coworker, Amy. She loves watching The Daily Show. She loves watching funny videos on YouTube and solving puzzles. However, her 13-year-old son loves playing Minecraft and watching gamers on YouTube play it. And even though this isn't really interesting to Amy, she will make a point by sitting with her son to see what he's currently building on the game, and also to see what other gamers on YouTube are building. And this allows Amy to communicate and connect with her son and see the world a little bit differently through his eyes and the eyes of a 13-year-old. So aside from these two examples of my coworkers, what other ways can you infuse freshness in your life? And you can post your answers in chat. And again, my question is, what other ways can you infuse freshness in your life? And what can you do differently to find and seek inspiration? Okay, travel. That's a pretty awesome answer. Try new online courses. Okay. Any particular areas you want to travel to? Listening to different music? Definitely taking a walk in a neighborhood. I'm sure a lot of us have been doing that nowadays ever since this pandemic hit. Reading all the books, but I haven't read. I definitely could relate to that also. DC Startup Week, which is why you're all here. Talking to people with different perspectives. Yep. Modifying your daily routine. Okay. And just a little bit of a personal story. So I've been living within the DC area for roughly about 7 years now. I originally lived in Fairfax, Vienna, and I was definitely complaining about the traffic on Route 66. I was able to find new shortcuts to get home a lot quicker. And I did that by talking to people who were able to provide me great tips and ways I could get around Route 66. Asia. All right, awesome. Yeah, Asia is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful place. All right, so thank you all for your answers. And those are definitely some ways that you can use to infuse freshness into your day-to-day life and get new different perspectives. All right, so though we can practice the innovation behavior of freshness and try to be mindful of every inspiration that comes our way, we also have to be aware of our own cognitive biases and know how to handle them. So let's talk a little bit about cognitive biases. And you can think of them as a collection of rivers or mental shortcuts that have evolved in our brains over time to help shape our judgment of the world. And now studies say that there are over 12 or 25 cognitive biases. Wikipedia even has a model that has 153, which we are definitely not going to cover today because 153 is a lot and totally not possible. But either way, they're all mental shortcuts that help us make quick decisions. And they're often a result of our brain's attempt to simplify information processing. So our brain is a very powerful and efficient and magnificent machine that runs on autopilot. Our breathing, our blinking, all our internal processes that keeps us alive are all commands and decisions of our brain. And the brain requires these mental shortcuts to help us make sense of the world and reach decisions relatively quickly, and to give itself a break every now and then because it is working really, really hard. It is estimated that the average adult makes 35,000 remotely conscious decisions each day. Now imagine if we had to actually put effort into making all those 35K decisions in a semi-conscious, deliberative way. We will be exhausted. I'm not even sure if we'll have the time to do that, to think, how am I going to sleep? Like I cannot comprehend trying to make and being aware of making all of those 35K decisions. And so these cognitive biases, heuristics, or mental shortcuts, however you want to call them, they help us make those 35K decisions a lot more efficiently. However, in order for us to break through these barriers and to break through these shortcuts, we have to be aware when these biases are happening and what these biases are. We have to learn how to slow down our thinking and be more systematic in our approach to solving problems. So from our experience on the design thinking side, we narrowed it down to 4 biases that might be the reason why you are getting stuck. And additionally, we are providing a few tools that you can use to break free from these biases. So the first bias that I want to talk about is called the cognitive bias. And the first cognitive bias that I want to talk about is called the curse of knowledge bias. And the curse of knowledge bias is the inability to completely separate oneself from knowledge. It is this unfair assumption that others share the same knowledge as you. So when you are under the curse of knowledge, we assume that people know more about a topic than they actually do. And we are especially susceptible to the curse of knowledge once we gain an expert or mastery level of knowledge on a particular subject or an area. And we experience this because we spend so much time in that subject or area that we struggle to remember that other people have different viewpoints and knowledge levels and experiences. And it's definitely understandable to forget that we were once novices at one point. That could have been a few months or years ago, and we cannot really always remember that. And we definitely take great pride in being an expert or master at something, and we should, because we definitely put a lot of time and effort and work into reaching the level that we are. However, we cannot always assume that everyone knows what we know and that they can understand our expert level type of language. So remember how in my introduction, I gave a very somewhat vague description of what I do? I did that intentionally for the purpose of this workshop. So really in full, my go-to response to what I actually do is, as an innovation design thinker, I collaborate with startups, emerging entrepreneurs, and AARP internal business units to help them think through their challenges and their ideas and solve problems through human-centered design approaches. And most people are like, okay, well, that's impressive. What does that all mean? Or they just kind of glaze over, especially when talking to my family or some members of my family. So on a side note, when I do talk to my family about my job and what I actually do, I give them the simplified version because at least they are able to know that I am not some kind of disgrace to the family. And really, it's not really dumbing things down, but it's trying to put things into an understandable perspective to those who are not within the world that you are an expert in. So for my audience, within this space, I mean, you definitely understand the words that I'm saying, but for those who are new or who are not in the world of innovation, design thinking, or startups, that might be a little bit hard for them to understand. And it is nearly impossible to unlearn what we have all learned. However, we can be mindful and take a step back and try to look at things as if you are experiencing it for the first time. So a helpful practice that we like to use to combat the curse of knowledge is practicing what we call having a beginner's mindset. So a beginner's mindset is trying to approach a problem, a solution, a task, or an activity like a beginner. So for example, if you are preparing and eating oatmeal for breakfast for the very first, let me rephrase that. So for example, if you are preparing and eating oatmeal for breakfast, pretend that is your first time doing this. Take the time to read instructions on the packet or on the box. Be observant of everything from start to finish. And when you are eating the oatmeal, pretend it's the first time you are eating oatmeal. So be aware and observant of the texture, the taste, the smell, and how the temperature and how it feels just going down your throat. So that is one way that you can practice having a beginner's mindset, and you can practice it with any other task within your life. Another example is that the majority of us, I'm assuming, has a car or have driven a car before. So an example here is that when you are getting into your car, take it all back to a time when you were first learning how to drive and how you acted back then. So for me, as an example, and trying to embody this beginner's mindset, I would be more cautious and systematic, right? So I would make sure that I am adjusting my mirror. I would always adjust my seats. I would double check to see the placement of where my feet are. I would check to see if all my buttons are working. I would make sure that my headlights and my blinker lights and any other lights is working properly. So nowadays, as an expert driver, in air quotes, I just hop in, start my car, and drive away. But trying to practice that beginner's mindset, I definitely slow myself down and try to be more aware of everything that I am doing. And definitely by having a beginner's mindset, again, is all about slowing down our thinking and just being more aware of our own expertise and how our own expertise can cloud our thinking and also others' understanding. Now, referring back to our brains being these efficient machines that love shortcuts, this bias is one of our brain's favorites. Now, the availability bias is the notion that if something is easily recalled, it must be important, or at least more important than any alternative solutions which are not as readily recalled. Now, this can lead to risky decision-making and hinder innovation by always defaulting to the same old ideas. And as psychologist and behavioral economics expert Daniel Kahneman explains it, we usually operate as if what you see is all there is. And oftentimes, there is also a level of emotion tied to this information being recalled, thus adding another layer of hindrance. So, for example, in truth, you have a 1 in 3.75 million chance of actually being attacked by a shark. However, frequent reportings of shark attacks in the media misleads people to perceive that, that the actuality and the circumstances of these shark attacks are actually greater than it is. So when people recall all this reported information of these shark attacks, they avoid the beach, they avoid getting into the water due to this fear of being attacked by a shark, and also the perception that the risk of a shark attack is actually greater than it actually is. And oftentimes we get stuck within this bias because we give more weight to current or easily recalled information instead of pushing ourselves to dive deeper within our recollections. And I say this again, so in order for us to be a disruptive innovator, we require to deliberately push ourselves beyond these top of mind ideas. So how are we going to do that? And we're going to do this by doing a really quick activity. Now I'm going to give you all roughly about 45 seconds, and with a writing instrument of your choice and a separate piece of paper, list as many ways a pen can be used other than being a writing instrument. You don't have to put anything into chat at the moment. So again, the instructions are in about 45 seconds with a writing instrument of your choice and a separate piece of paper, write down the ways a pen can be used other than being a writing instrument. So I'm going to start my timer now. All right, time is up. So if you can post in chat, just count how many ideas you have listed on this piece of paper of the ways that a pen can be used aside from being a writing instrument. 4, 7, 8, 4, 4, 2, 6, 5. Okay, 4. All right, so I'm going to call on Sheila and Jay Lange. If you can just post in chat, I guess, about 3 of the ways ways a pen can be used aside from being a writing instrument. Okay, so Sheila said one of the ways it can be used is a weapon, a hair clip, a toy, okay, a rolling pin, okay, all right. So when we do this activity, we typically do it in 2 rounds. Oh, balancing weight and a blowgun. So when we actually do this activity, we do it typically in 2 rounds. And the second round is being more of a group activity, which is kind of difficult to do in this format. But what we usually find in the second round is that there are more uses for the pen and that they tend to be more outlandish. And the idea here is that when you think you are tapped out of ideas, you have the power of the collective of your group to help you push through for more ideas. And this is definitely a great tool to use, an activity to help train your mind to push beyond the first thoughts and to think beyond what you think you are capable of. Another tool that we like to use to help us push through is called Make or Break. And how this tool helps you is that it challenges the unstated rules, conventions, and norms that limit the way we think when it comes to approaching a challenge. So here is how it works. So step 1 is think about the rules or norms around your challenge. Step 2 is find a rule that intrigues you and break it by removing it, exaggerating it, or twisting it. And step 3, of course, is use this as inspiration for new ideas. So for example, if you were in the process of trying to make a unique dining experience, you first want to think about the norms around the restaurant and the dining experience. And these norms are the things that you are definitely used to, accustomed to, or these can be things that have become some kind of standard across all restaurants and dining experiences. An interesting example that I found that definitely broke some rules and conventions and which absolutely terrifies me is what they call dinner in the sky. And I'm sure you probably have seen this. This was showing up on my Facebook feed. I'm like, why are you showing me this? But in chat, what rules and norms do you think this experience broke? And so again, my question is, just by looking at this picture, what rules and norms did this experience break? Okay, safety, how to get there. Definitely a lot of words on safety. Eating in the ground in base sitting. Okay, fixed dining room. Yeah, I mean, definitely I think when they were coming up with this challenge, they were like, well, a restaurant or a dining experience doesn't have to have a solid foundation. So let's take it up in the air. People don't really need to move around, or they don't go to the bathroom often. So let's constrain them by using a seatbelt while they eat so they don't fall off. Or usually restaurants are within 4 walls. So let's remove all the walls and suspend them high in the air. So yeah, it's definitely a terrifying experience. So now let's talk a little bit more about this and take this a little bit further. Can anyone think of any company or organization that definitely broke some rules and norms? Uber, definitely. Okay. Any other example? Airbnb. Airbnb definitely, I would say, changed the game. They were like, hey, instead of people going to hotels, let them stay at strangers' houses. Same thing with Uber. Instead of taxi drivers, have people get into strangers' cars and be drove around. Yeah, so all of these are great, really great examples. Okay, so moving on, who here likes to order the same item from their favorite restaurant? I'm definitely guilty of that. Who here in the pre-COVID days takes the same route to work? Definitely me. I definitely always took the yellow line to Gallery Place. And who here watches the same news channel or reads the same magazine every day or every month when it arrives? Me also, all right? So the next bias that I am discussing is called the status quo bias. And that makes us always default to keeping things the same. It is about our preference for the current state of affairs. And we are creatures of habit, and that is totally fine. We know what we like, we know what we don't like, and when we like something, we tend to stick with it. So there's a variety of reasons why we tend to like things the way it is. And one of them is that change is often feared to be a loss. Another is that we might not have been exposed to anything that is different, or we might just not have had that experience of seeing different stimuli. And we often get worried or hung up on the overall possible impact of our decision. So for me, for example, I mean, like I never navigate away from my favorite item at my favorite restaurant, because if I order something different, what happens if I get sick, I get diarrhea or something, and now my experience and view of my favorite restaurant is now tainted, and I don't want to risk that. So when new opportunities arise, we would rather stay with what we have than to switch to something new. In other words, we think the old ideas have always worked, so why change them? Which is why we get stuck. However, as technology grows, cultures shift and consumer behaviors change in either opposition or an adaptation to these changes, we as innovators and creatives and business owners, we have to grow with it, no matter how uncomfortable we are with it. So here's a little case study that I want to provide. A paper that was published in the Journal of Risk and Uncertainty by Samuelson and Deckhauser. They provide a really interesting example of the status quo bias in action by loyal Coca-Cola drinkers. So in the 1980s, Coca-Cola introduced a new formulation of their Coke recipe and called it New Coke. And they conducted blind taste tests, over 200,000 of them, and it was shown that participants prefer the taste of New Coke over Classic Coke. However, interestingly enough, 3 months after the launch of New Coke, Coca-Cola brought back the classic version due to the pressure and outrage that an American classic has been altered. And it's interesting because people actually hoarded classic Coke in their basements, and some people even reported that they were experiencing depression or got depressed because of the loss of their favorite soft drink. And also Time magazine kind of gave this warning because they were reported that even before New Coke went on sale, consumers were nervous that the company would ruin a good thing. And even though there was a clear preference for New Coke, the status quo bias governed people's actions as they stuck with what they were accustomed to. And however, consumers are not the only ones affected by the status quo bias. Companies and decision makers are also affected by this too. And I like stating this case study because it is also fairly more recent, and it's definitely a great case study to read, but it is about the downfall of Toys R Us. Now, just some background about Toys R Us. It was founded in 1948 by Charles Lazarus. And Toys R Us has definitely become one of the most iconic and renowned international toy sellers and one of the most recognized, even still to this day, after their unfortunate demise. However, 70 years after its founding, they closed their doors and they filed for bankruptcy in 2018. And now we can go through a list of all the reasons why they failed, but one reason that I do want to point out is that they failed to adapt and innovate. And they definitely and obviously did not keep up with technology and the changing consumer behavior. Kids were no longer really interested in physical toys, they were interested in video games. And unlike their competitors who were embracing technology and innovation, they were not doing so. So to quote the director of retail studies at Columbia University, Mark A. Cohen, Toys R Us was still trading on the view that they were the center of the universe of the toy industry. They got cocky, they got narcissistic, they got egocentric. They were definitely stuck on the belief that they were still the giants in the space, which was no longer true. And in reality, their competitors were definitely beating them. Well, how do we overcome the status quo bias and our fears or uncertainties of change? Well, here's a tool to help you push through that, and it's called Get Fired, and it's one of our favorites, and it's definitely really fun. And it's a simple tool that you can use to add to your brainstorming sessions or add into your personal work or process, and here is how you apply it. So with whatever challenge that is being presented in front of you, think of ideas that can get you fired, right? So when we think of get fired ideas, and when you're approaching this activity, it must still solve the problem, but it has to be either illegal, immoral, impossible, ridiculous, or even ridiculously expensive. And the idea here is to push yourself beyond what you are comfortable with, and also to push yourself beyond any boundaries that your company or yourself has in place. So let's practice this by coming up with a get fired idea on this challenge. How might we encourage older adults to be more active? And you can post your ideas on chat, and I'll give you some time. But remember that these are ideas, these are not going to be actions, right? We are just brainstorming ideas. So have fun with this. Threaten them, yep, put them in dangerous situations. Okay, give them jetpacks. Jetpacks is definitely a theme nowadays, I love that. Shout collars. Okay, I like that. $10,000 for each lost pound. Lace their food with PCP. All right, pull the fire alarm. Take away the ability to drive their cars, so okay, so they can walk more. Electric shocks. You guys are wild and I am loving it. So, okay, charge more for health plans. So we can think of get fired ideas as really big ideas that are definitely breaking the rules. And it's always easier to take a really big idea, such as a get fired idea, and shrink it down to a more hireable, in air quotes, hireable idea. And you can do this in different ways, such as focusing what you are for about the idea and build on it, right? You can do the opposite of what was actually being presented or thrown out. You can keep the idea relatively the same, but you can do less of it or scale it back down to an area where it is possibly safer or where it teeters along the line of morals. Or you can find an interesting word or phrase or little section of the idea and build onto it. So if you are ever stuck, the get fired mindset can help you push out some really interesting and fun ideas. And last but not least, our last cognitive bias that I want to talk about is called framing. And framing is the way that individuals, groups, and societies perceive and communicate about their reality. framing creates like this mental filter that influences how we perceive information and act in any given situation, depending on how the information is being presented, rather than the actual facts themselves. Also, I apologize ahead of time, my dogs are barking in the background, so hopefully you guys aren't hearing that. So an interesting that I learned about polygraph tests or lie detector tests is that they actually ask the same question 2 different ways in order to gain a more accurate reading of the results. So for example, they may ask a person in question, did you stab so-and-so? And then present the same question differently. Did you stab so-and-so with a knife? Now, I don't exactly know the science or the workings behind polygraph testing, but our decisions and answers are impacted by the way that information is presented to us or asked. So another example, if anyone has noticed this while grocery shopping, on meat packaging, they usually say 85% lean meat. They discovered that people actually prefer like 85% lean meat compared to 15% fat because 85 is a higher number, therefore it is more superior. And also by seeing lean meat makes it sound healthier compared to saying 15% fat, if that makes any sense. So when in reality, they're both saying the same thing, it's just that the information is just being presented differently. And framing is this interesting paradigm through which we perceive our reality. And although we might not really be aware of our own frames when coming up with new ideas, it definitely encompasses all of our unconscious assumptions during the decision-making process. So one of my favorite stories that I like to tell is from Doug Dietz. If I'm saying his last name correctly, he was a designer of GE Healthcare. And he recently, or I'm sorry, he didn't recently, this was a while back, but he completed a 2-year project or redesign of an MRI machine. And when he was presented with the opportunity to see the MRI machine be installed within a hospital and go live, he took that chance. So once the MRI machine was set up and running, he was asked to step out of the room as a patient was arriving to be scanned. And as he was waiting in the hall, he noticed a frail-looking girl with her worried-looking parents approaching the room. And most notably, he noticed that the little girl had tears in her eyes, and she definitely had an expression of fright in her face. He also observed that the MRI tech picked up the phone and asked for an anesthesiologist. And when he asked about this, he learned that 80% of pediatric patients have to be sedated because they are so scared of the machine and they can't sit still long enough for the scan to be completed. And it was at that moment that Doug realized that his design decisions were impacted by his own frame of mind. So his elegant and sleek redesign, which was definitely beautiful in the eyes of an adult, it looked more like a cavernous, monstrous mouth in the eyes of a children. And he used this information not to redesign the MRI, but to redesign the MRI experience. And what you see here now is an example of his MRI redesign. And part of it is what he calls his adventure series. So where his MRI is positioned and reframed to be a fun experience for young children. And some of his examples are like a pirate ship. Here's the one that's kind of like in space. So like when the MRI machine starts up and there's that boom, boom, boom jump, they're not scared by it because they are believing that they are in a spaceship and they are believing that this is part of the experience of this game of a machine that he created. So a helpful tool that we like to use to push through our framing bias is called star power. And it's a tool that we use to help us shift our frames and perspectives by stepping into the shoes of a specific persona. And it's very simple, and here's how it works. So step 1 is to pick a famous person. And you should pick a famous person that you know well enough about them that you can have some assumption of how they can solve a particular problem or challenge. Step two is the fun part, is where you actually assume the persona and you assume that persona to come up with a solution. And three, of course, is always to be inspired and make that solution real. So here's a short list of the personas that we ask our participants in our ideation sessions to embody. So for example, when embodying the persona of the Dalai Lama, we find that people generate ideas that tend to be more elegant, harmonious, peaceful, and unobtrusive and passive in nature. In contrast to embodying the persona of Serena Williams, our participants tend to take the challenge on with a more aggressive, powerful, yet elegant approach where they emphasize strength and power within their ideas. And Miss Piggy tends to be a little bit funny because she tends to help inspire ideas that are a little bit more needy, where we try to provide too much services to the consumers to make them love us even more. So there's that sense of like smothering to gain their love and respect. And of course, definitely, these are top of mind ideas that you are throwing out that can be further refined. So for example, Oprah is definitely one of our most popular personas that people like to embody. And going back to the challenge of how might we get older adults to be more active, within the Oprah persona, people tend to throw out the idea of, you get a gym, you get a gym, you get a gym, everyone gets a gym. However, we can boil that idea down to something smaller and more possible within the company's resources. So instead of providing personal gyms to everyone, which is going to be very costly for a company's resources, what we can take out of this idea is partnering with local gyms or fitness institutions to provide discounted or free trial memberships to older adults in the community. So I'm just really curious to see if anyone has any famous person in mind that is alive, deceased, or fictional that they think could be a good persona to embody. So if anyone has any suggestions, you can post that into chat. Tyler Perry. We often hear Kanye. Kanye is one of our also personas that we add. Jane Fonda, okay. Will Smith. No Kanye. Other times we do like famous billionaires like Elon Musk and Richard Branson. But sometimes like the more, I would say the eccentric, the funner we get to have with the ideas that we come out of. Smokey the Bear, okay. All right, Dwayne Johnson. All right, so that wraps up all the biases that I have listed in the activities. So with all that said, I definitely want to thank you all for your participation. And before we jump into Q&A, I just want to do a quick recap of what we covered. So in this workshop, we talked about breaking through our rivers of thinking by embracing lateral thinking. And to practice lateral thinking, we embody the behavior of freshness to help us seek stimuli to help inspire new ideas. And we also talked about cognitive biases and how our brain relies on them to speed up our decision making. And however, we need to know that these biases can also cause us to get stuck instead of having us advance forward. We went through 4 cognitive biases to be aware of and tools to help us combat these biases. So we fight through the curse of knowledge bias by embracing and practicing a beginner's mindset, right? We push through the availability bias by exercising our mind through the pen exercise and breaking through the norms and rules that hold us back with the make or break tool. We accept change and dismiss the status quo by pushing through our constraints and uncomfortability by coming up with ideas that can get us fired. And last, we change our frames by embodying personas of famous personalities to come up with different ideas each time. So that leaves us with about 9 or 8 minutes. So I would like to open up the floor to any questions. Also, if you have to leave, if you have any questions, you can post into chat. If not, you can reach out to us at designthinking@aarp.org. So how may we get a copy of the slides in your presentation? I can definitely try working with the organizers and see if I could distribute my slides that way. If not, I also have some of our activity slides that I can distribute as well. What kind of car do I actually drive? I drive a 2015 Kia Soul, which provides enough room for me and my 4 dogs. All right, so looks like no one has any questions. Actually, one question come up. What innovation is AARP working on for the 50+ population? Trick question, as I'm not exactly sure what I can or can't say, but we are doing numerous challenges around the areas of gaming, and I apologize because I'm forgetting the rest. And I mentioned gaming because I'm definitely interested in gaming. But we're doing challenges on that, and we're working with different startups across the United States to find particular solutions that can affect the 50+ population. Yep, as Jessica pointed out, you can definitely learn more on our website at aarpinnovationlabs.org. How may we connect with AARP Innovation with ideas in our local community? Definitely, Samuel, you can email us at designthinking@aarp.org, and we can direct you to the right people within our department to do that. Teresa asks, how many times do you recommend revisiting these biases in your innovation process? I think that's a really difficult question to answer. I think for us, since we, this is like our daily practice, it has become almost second nature to us to always make sure that we are checking our bias. So I guess the short answer would be we revisit these biases every day, every time we do a design session or a training like this. But it's not something, or I guess if you are particularly trying to solve a challenge, you can always read about these biases again to make sure that when you are going to start working on your challenge, you're being reminded of these biases before you actually start the process. All right, you're welcome, Teresa. And how do you shift thinking process to get into a creative state? So one of the ways that we like to shift into a creative process, we actually do it in a variety of ways. One of the first ways that we do it is when, this is kind of difficult now because it's the era of social isolation, but when we're actually working on this in group or activities, we choose a particular location that has a lot of light, that has a lot of color. That way people feel a lot more welcomed and free and safe to explore or put out any ideas without feeling any judgment, compared to doing a creative session or some sort of problem-solving session in a room that is 4 walls with those unnatural halogen lightings, which I absolutely hate. So that is one way. And also when we're doing our room setup for this, is that we always provide like fidget toys and we find that fidget toys let people embody this behavior of playfulness and fun. And also whenever we kick off a session, we provide agreements, kind of like how I did in the very beginning, how I asked us to be open-minded, be positive. That way you are letting them know what type of behavior to come in. Definitely if when we're working on our ideation session and I see someone that I know or familiar with, that tends to be one of those people who tend turn ideas down. So once I have identified that, within the beginning of our session, I let them know that we are in the process of generating and coming up with ideas, not turning ideas down or analyzing them, because that comes at a different time. So it's definitely kind of like setting the stage and making sure that your stage is prepared to have people be involved in a creative state. So is there a particular person we should engage with for the AARP startup engagement? Thank you, Jessica, for answering that. So anything startup related, I would say reach out to hello@aarpinnovationlabs.org. But in general, you can always reach out to us at designthinking@aarp.org for any design thinking related questions or any creative exercises and things like that. All right, so does anyone else have any questions before we close out this session? And my puppy says goodbye, so. All right, so I would like to call on Rachel. Is Rachel?
I'm back. Thank you so much, Quo, for a great session and talk on how you're able to get unstuck. I saw that Jessica put on the chat if you need to get in touch with AARP Innovation Labs, how they can help and how you can support. It's just hello@aarpinnovationlabs.org for any startup related engagement. So thank you so much again, Quo, and for all the attendees. I love seeing all the chat messages go back and forth. Quo, thank you for answering questions from the audience. Please feel free to go on to Attendify, post what you learned on the activity stream that you attended this session. And Quo is also listed as a speaker, so feel free to reach out or find his contact information there. Thank you again, and thank you so much for AARP Innovation Labs for being the sponsor of DC Startup Week and helping to put together this talk, as well as a couple talks that we have later on this afternoon. We're going into our 1 o'clock time slot where we have 2 talks going on, one about advertising and the growth of business through advertising. What does that look like and what does that mean? As well as we have a second talk going on about, and I'm going to find you the exact name right now, strategy on how to build a better team. So that's going to be all around team building, recruiting, and developing a hiring process. So I hope to see you at the 1 o'clock. And then again, we have a 2 o'clock again hosted by AARP and Innovation Lab on big and small, creating strategic partnerships and how they could foster and deliver greater growth. So I hope to see you not at the 1 o'clock, also the 2 o'clock. So I'll see you guys soon. Thank you so much.